Our top focus, the festival season is just around the corner and seems like there is no respite for the common man. Inflation continues to pinch pockets, and now you would have to rethink before heading back home for the holidays. If you ask why, well, IndiGo has now introduced a fuel charge on domestic and international routes effective from October 6th. The airline says the decision has been taken after the significant increase in aviation fuel prices. Viewers, remember the fuel prices have surged in the last 3 months with consecutive price hikes every month and under this pricing structure. What this essentially means is passengers booking IndiGo flights will incur a fuel charge per sector based on the sector distance, that is. All right, so that is, of course, a clear setback as far as flyers are concerned with this decision as well. So what we do understand right now, as far as the recent hike in ATF was 5% for the month of October. So the ATF is now priced at, different prices. So the jet fuel prices have risen by over 32% since June this year, essentially. So ATF prices were hiked by a little over 14% in September, and then it was hiked by 8.5% in August and 1.56% in July. So what this essentially means, and let's take that point across to the guests who are joining me this evening. Parvez Damania, Aviation Expert, as well as Devesh Agarwal, Chief Analyst, BangaloreAviation.com. Good evening to the both of you. Great to see you back here on Mirror now. Devesh, let me come to you first. How are ATF prices determined? Could you help us understand the factors that are driving this, which is why we're seeing this cascading effect?
Thank you so much for having me. ATF prices in India, in fact, are probably the most decontrolled, fuel product and kept away from, shall we say, political, interference amongst all the petroleum-based fuels. It's also the fuel that is the most heavily marked up. And of course, it's one of the most heavily taxed fuels because, the mindset in the government and the government-owned oil marketing companies is air travel is, the rich man's mode of travel without, really appreciating that today India is part of the G20. It's leading the G20. And the fact is that air travel is a critical part of, business infrastructure today, but that mindset has not shifted. Overall, globally, yes, jet fuel has increased. There is no doubt about that. India is probably 2x the price of global fuel prices purely because of, I would say extremely, for lack of a better word, I'm trying to figure out, a diplomatic way of saying it, but very, very idiotic fuel taxation policies as well as fuel profit markup policies. That is where things are. And that's why fuel prices are, ATF prices show the highest increase, even though petrol prices and diesel prices do not, because petrol and diesel are, more politically sensitive. So they are more, sort of controlled, if not directly by, as we say, ishara, just a wink and a nod to the government-owned OMCs.
All right, Devesh, as you make those opening remarks, I'm going to come back to you in terms of, what the loopholes are here, because we do remember what the aviation minister had earlier said, because this is not the first time, of course, that we're seeing it. And that's the point that I want to take across to Parvez. Parvez, the last time also we spoke about it, it was clearly the timing of the airfares going up comes just ahead of the festival season, which of course typically sees higher air travel as well. But just to point out the fact that since June, jet fuel prices have gone up by 32%, which is again not respite from any angle for the common man.
The aviation fuel prices are the highest ever in 2023. They've crossed pre-COVID level. Plus, this time the fuel prices have jumped up 4 times. Fuel is the major cost in the airline industry. So till a certain point, the airlines will sustain. After that, they will have no option but to increase the prices. IndiGo has increased it according to the length of the sector, but it will definitely affect overall any sector that you're flying. It will affect you. The longer the sector, the more fuel tax you'll pay. Now it's just a matter of time. In a day or two, all the other airlines will do the same. And overall, the entire cost structure of flying from A to B will go up. It is very sad that it's just come before the festival season. So it's really going to affect the common man who's going to plan for the festival, and he will be paying higher fares, not only on IndiGo, but I think every airline in India will do the same very soon. Again, I'm saying I don't blame the airlines. They are also at such a situation where they have no option but to increase the fares or put a fuel tax or whatever you may call it. But indirectly, it does affect the fare, whatever you call it, whatever we call it.
Right. Devesh, coming back to the point that, of course, Parvez is also making, the dominoes effect is also critical for Indian airlines. Is 40% of their operating costs are attributed to jet fuel?
I would say more than 40% is
Yes, I will
attributed
agree
to
with
jet fuel.
Parvez as well. It's probably closer to 50%.
Yeah,
As I said, it's just that, I mean, see, Parvez is very, very correct. The prices are going up. And so the airlines have got no choice. Indigo is purely exercising fiscal prudence, and it's behaving in a proper corporate manner, that its loyalty has to be to its shareholders and to its company. uh, in the past, we have seen airlines go belly up purely because they tried to absorb the increases, especially in fuel prices, at the extent of keeping ticket prices the same. And we have seen, if you see, Indian aviation literally is a graveyard of failed airlines. So from a standpoint of prudence and need, I fully agree. I am not disagreeing with the justification for Indigo increasing the fuel surcharge. And if you see, fuel surcharge is a tactic that is used extensively by international airlines. The European airlines are probably one of the biggest users of fuel taxes. But even your Middle East carriers like Emirates and Qatar and all of them, they use the fuel taxes. So, it becomes a very nice way to present to a passenger when they're doing a search on fare that I'm giving you a low fare. And then, when you start adding up everything, that's, once you get them into your website and once they start and they're almost ready to buy, then you unload all these, fares on them. So it's a very clever marketing technique. One has to, however, see few things I would caution, and this is where government, we should get a clarity from the airline. They should get a clarity from the airline that, if what is going to be the disposition of the fuel surcharge? Is it going to be considered part of the basic fare, so that, if you ever cancel or rebook a ticket, the fees involved in that, will they be offset against the fuel surcharge? Because typically, at least on the international carriers, they what they do is that in case you cancel the ticket, the fuel surcharge is refunded in full. Because you never flew the flight, so that is this thing. And similarly is the GST, which is 5% and 12% on economy class. Okay, in case of Indigo, it's all economy, so it's 5%. Will that GST be levied on the basic fare, or will it also be levied onto the fuel surcharge? There are a few of these kind of questions that I feel the airline must answer. But yeah, ultimately, like it or not, you are going to see an increase in fares. It is due to the increase in prices. The government has been repeatedly talking about bringing ATF and all other fuels within the ambit of GST, so that we get a more, sort of level playing field and the fuel prices get reduced. But I don't know if there is political will to get that, pushed through. The fuel prices
Devesh, just interjecting you there on that
yeah,
point, because the civil
yeah.
aviation minister earlier had also requested certain states to reduce VAT. So why do you think it has been a challenge for the government to really get this going? Could you help us understand the airline's point of view as well?
It's a simple addiction, Nivedha. It's simple addiction. The states are used to this easy money. Let's look at it. I mean, you look at the price of petrol. Let's look at the price of petrol. In Delhi, the price of the petrol is probably X. In Bombay, it's 1.2 to 1.3X. Why? Because the state of Maharashtra historically has been one of the highest, levying tax. Maharashtra has always levied the highest levels of taxes on fuel. They are used to this, easy money that is coming from fuel taxes. It's the easiest way for them to take money out of the system, to get the consumers, their citizens and their residents to pay taxes. It's just a pure, simple addiction. And so they don't find, I mean, I have fullest respect for Mr. Sindhia. I have fullest respect for the Prime Minister. And in which case, I am still asking the Prime Minister, when he has got such an absolute thumping majority in the parliament, why is he not taking these politically, difficult decisions? Use this opportunity to push through decisions that will be beneficial to the entire country.
Right, Devesh, as you make those comments by saying that it is easy money and a great marketing technique as well, I'm going to take that point across to Parvez if he thinks so. But let's quickly listen in to what the Civil Aviation Minister had to say in June, and we'll come back to discussing this.
If you look at the Laffer curve example in economics, if you lower tax rates, you will actually increase buoyancy of revenues. And I'm very glad to report to this House that prior to my taking over, we had 11 states that charged VAT rates on ATF between 1 to 5%, and we had 25 states that charged VAT rates between 15 to 30%. That position today, and through you, Madam, I'd like to thank the Chief Ministers of all those states. We have reversed that equation. 12 states have reduced their level of VAT from 25 to 30% down to 1 to 4%.
Parvez, of course, we did hear what the aviation minister had to say, and Devesh also making those remarks. But quickly, to understand from your perspective, in your opinion, also, do you see it as easy money and a great marketing technique?
The states have to understand that the more they support the aviation industry, the more growth will be there, the more industries will grow. The states and the central government will stop looking airline as a luxury item. It has to be considered part of infrastructure, and the more stronger the infrastructure, the better growth of the state will be. The state should consider this very seriously and reduce the tax on fuel as much as possible. The central government also should rethink, because the aviation industry has been growing exceedingly well in India. It's doing exceedingly well. But that is because the passenger flow is there, and the passenger support is there tremendously. But if the fares keep going up, there will be some stage where passengers will deter away from flying, and this will affect the entire industry. So it is in the interest of the airlines, it is in the interest of the state government and the central government to make aviation and flying as affordable as possible in India, so the industry can keep growing. The government is working very hard on the Udan scheme,
Right.
Uday Desh Ka Har Nagarik. But on that scheme, if the fuel prices get affected so badly, all the airlines will have no option to keep increasing, and the whole scheme of making the common man fly, which is the Prime Minister's dream, which has so successfully been working up till now, will get affected. So it is time that the states and the central government reconsider and see how they can reduce the taxation on the fuel and make it as affordable as possible for the airline. So the growth that is going on so well keeps growing on and on.
All right. That is, of course, the current situation with the fact which is not happening very easily for flyers as well. Right, Devesh, would you want to come in and...
Yeah, I was going to say, I fully support what Parvez is saying. In fact, when I was infrastructure committee of the chairman of the Bangalore Chamber, I put, at that time, Karnataka was charging almost, I think, 28% tax. And Hyderabad had reduced that tax to, if I remember, around 4%. And I actually showed a calculation to them, which I was showing them that airlines were deliberately stopping in Hyderabad and tankering their aircraft, filling up the aircraft with fuel, coming to Bangalore, flying to Bangalore, and then flying back to Hyderabad or somewhere else, and not buying fuel in Bangalore. So effectively, the state revenue was actually going down because of the higher rate of tax. I fully agree with Parvez. The air industry is the transport mode for the 21st century. Uh, India is, we are wanting to take the lead in the world in, we want iPhones, we want electronics to be manufactured. We are the global leaders in software. We are the global leaders in many knowledge-based industries. These are all industries that need air travel as their primary, base of transport. And so what we have also seen in the past is the Indian consumer is having a kind of a Lakshman Dhara, so to speak. If the airfare is at a certain amount, they will, if it crosses a certain, Lakshman Dhara, then they will not fly. So who loses? The airline loses, the economy loses, the state loses. If you keep the taxation level at a realistic level, you keep the taxation at a proper level, which encourages the aviation industry, you're utilizing it, you're going to get more revenue. So rate, exactly what the minister said in parliament, is that lower the rate, higher the buoyancy. We have seen that in income tax, from the times of the back in the 70s when income tax was 90% to today when income tax is not even 30%, the revenues are go up. So this kind of rationalization and rational thinking is what really needs to be, is the need of the hour, to be honest with you.
Devesh, and on that note, I want to thank you and Parvez for joining us. Of course, essentially, overall demand remains the key driver. We want to thank you once again for taking the time out and sharing with us your perspective as far as this is concerned. We leave the conversation at that.